August 21, 1942. The humid night air over Guadalcanal was thick with salt and rot. The jungle pressed close, whispering with insects and the distant hiss of surf. Beyond the black line of palms, the Ilu River wound through the sand toward the sea. On its west bank, dug in behind makeshift log bunkers and hastily strung barbed wire, the men of the 1st Marine Division waited in the dark. They had landed only 2 weeks earlier, green, sunburned, half-starved, holding a single airfield that was barely finished. To the north lay the vast Pacific. To the south, the jungle that hid an enemy no one could yet see. And that night, they would face the first full Japanese counterattack of the Pacific War. The Marines didn't know it yet, but a full regiment of Japanese soldiers was moving toward them through the jungle. They were confident, overconfident. Their commander, Colonel Kayaneo Ichiki, believed the Americans were weak, poorly trained, and unwilling to fight at night. His orders were clear: drive them into the sea before sunrise. He didn't know that his enemy, the United States Marine Corps, had no intention of running. By mid-August 1942, the Pacific War had entered a new phase. For the first time since Pearl Harbor, American forces had seized the initiative. The landings on Guadalcanal, part of Operation Watchtower, were the first major Allied offensive in the Pacific. Their objective was Henderson Field, an airstrip under construction by the Japanese, strategically positioned to threaten supply routes between the U.S. and Australia. When the Marines landed on August 7, they expected heavy resistance. Instead, they found a deserted airfield and scattered opposition. The Japanese had withdrawn inland, surprised and disorganized. Within days, U.S. Seabees and engineers turned the captured strip into a functioning base. They named it for Major Lofton R. Henderson, a Marine pilot killed at Midway. But the Japanese were not about to let Guadalcanal go. To them, it was a matter of pride and strategy. Imperial headquarters ordered the island retaken immediately. The first response came from Colonel Ichiki's 28th Infantry Regiment, part of the veteran 7th Division that had fought in China. Confident in his men's superiority, Ichiki dismissed warnings about the size of the American force. He believed no more than a few hundred Marines held the area. So, on the night of August 19, Ichiki's advanced detachment, about 916 officers and men, landed at Taivu Point, east of the Marine perimeter. They marched west through the dense coastal jungle, intent on attacking what they believed was a small outpost guarding the airfield. The terrain worked against them from the start. The jungle was suffocating, roots like cables, swamps that swallowed boots, vines that tore at uniforms. The men carried rifles, bayonets, and light mortars. They advanced in silence, confident that the Marines would be asleep when they struck. It was a fatal assumption. The Marines were anything but unprepared. Colonel Clifton B. Cates, commanding the 1st Marines, and Colonel Edwin A. Pollock, whose 2nd Battalion held the eastern sector, had anticipated a night attack. The Marines had dug deep foxholes along the Ilu River, which the Americans mistakenly called the Tenaru. It wasn't a river in the true sense, more a tidal stream bordered by sandbars and dense palms. On the east bank, they placed barbed wire and pre-sighted machine guns. Behind them were 37mm anti-tank guns fitted with canister rounds, shells that turned into a storm of steel balls when fired. The men were tired, filthy, and underfed, but they were veterans now. They had survived 2 weeks of bombing, sniper fire, and hunger. They were ready. At 1:30 a.m., the first sound came, faint shouting, then the crack of a single rifle. Moments later, the dark line of the river exploded with muzzle flashes. Flares arced upward, bathing the beach in ghostly white. Dozens of figures splashed into the shallows, shouting "Banzai" as they charged across the sand. The Battle of the Tenaru had begun. The first wave of Japanese soldiers charged headlong into the Marine defenses, believing sheer courage would break the line. It didn't. The Marines opened fire with everything they had: Browning .30 caliber machine guns, M1919s, and Springfield rifles. The night lit up with red tracers and the staccato of automatic fire. Within seconds, the leading Japanese ranks were cut down, their bodies collapsing into the surf. More came behind them, stepping over the fallen. Some reached the wire and threw grenades, others crawled through the sand, trying to cut openings. But the Americans had zeroed every approach. Private Al Schmid's machine gun team on the right flank fired until their barrels glowed red. The river turned black with blood. The air was thick with the smell of cordite and burning grass. Ichiki's men were stunned. Their training had taught them that Americans lacked spirit, that they would retreat at the first sign of aggression. But the Marines stood fast, cold and methodical, mowing down wave after wave. By 3 a.m., the beach was a charnel ground. Hundreds of Japanese bodies lay tangled in the wire or floating in the shallows. Yet the attack did not stop. Ichiki ordered more assaults, personally leading groups toward the river, his sword raised high. The Marines held. At point-blank range, they fired canister rounds from their 37mm guns into the charging masses. Each shot tore holes through entire squads. By 4 a.m., the noise began to fade. Sporadic shots echoed, then silence, broken only by moans and the whisper of the tide. As dawn approached, a gray light crept over the beach. Marine officers scanned the scene through binoculars. What they saw was beyond comprehension. The entire eastern bank was littered with bodies, rifles still clutched, bayonets fixed, flags tangled in the wire. Some Japanese soldiers lay half-submerged in the shallows, the tide gently rocking them. Others still crawled forward, trying to reach the marine lines, only to be finished by rifle fire. Colonel Ichiki, refusing to retreat, regrouped the remnants of his force inside the coconut grove near the river mouth. He was determined to fight to the end. At 7 a.m., Marine artillery opened up. 105mm howitzers from Battery B, 11th Marines, pounded the grove relentlessly. Then came the counterattack. Colonel Pollock ordered Major Cresswell's 1st Battalion, 1st Marines to cross the river and finish the job. The Marines waded across in chest-deep water, rifles held above their heads, covering each other as they moved. Once across, they formed skirmish lines and advanced slowly into the trees. The scene was chaos, shattered palms, burning grass huts, wounded men crying out in Japanese. Machine guns rattled from hidden positions. Every few yards, a Marine dropped, hit by sniper fire. But they kept going. By mid-morning, they had surrounded Ichiki survivors near the mouth of the river. The Japanese fought to the last man, using grenades, pistols, and even swords. When Marine flamethrower teams moved in, the fight ended in smoke and fire. Colonel Ichiki, realizing the battle was lost, gathered his regimental colors, burned them, and committed suicide with his pistol. When the shooting stopped, only a handful of Japanese soldiers remained alive. Out of more than 900 men, only about 128 survived, most of them wounded and captured in the days that followed. For the Marines, the aftermath was sobering. As they policed the battlefield, they saw what fanaticism looked like up close. Bodies were piled 3 deep along the wire. The sand was soaked black. Some Japanese soldiers had crawled forward even after being mortally wounded, trying to drag grenades toward the Marine lines. War correspondent Richard Tregaskis, who witnessed the scene, later wrote, "There was no sign of fear among the dead, only the grim resolve of men who had fought until the end." The Marines had won, but they also understood something profound that morning. The enemy would never surrender easily. The Pacific War would not be quick, or simple, or predictable. For Japan, the Battle of the Tenaru was a shock. Colonel Ichiki's detachment had been expected to secure Guadalcanal within 48 hours. Instead, it was annihilated. The Imperial General Staff, embarrassed and confused, at first refused to believe the reports. They thought Ichiki's force must have been ambushed by an entire division. But aerial reconnaissance confirmed the truth, hundreds of Japanese bodies strewn across the sand near the Ilu River. For the United States, it was the first clear proof that the Marines could not only hold ground, they could destroy an elite Japanese unit in direct combat. The victory boosted morale across the Pacific. It proved that discipline and firepower could overcome even the most determined assaults. At Henderson Field, word spread quickly. The young Marines, many of them fighting their first battle, had faced Japan's best, and won. Yet victory came with realization. The Japanese would be back, in greater numbers, better supplied, and far more cautious. And they were. Over the next 6 months, Guadalcanal became a killing ground, artillery, air raids, and jungle ambushes turning the island into hell. But the foundation of that eventual victory was laid here, at the Tenaru River, in the first desperate hours of America's counteroffensive. Marine commanders studied the battle carefully. They saw how the Japanese had relied on bravery rather than tactics, and how that bravery, unmatched as it was, could not break well-prepared defenses backed by disciplined firepower. It became the model for future island defenses, from Tarawa to Peleliu to Iwo Jima. The phrase, "hold fast," became a Marine motto not just of courage, but of method, a belief that no matter how fierce the assault, control and precision would prevail over chaos. In the years after the war, veterans who had fought at the Tenaru rarely spoke of it. Many were haunted by what they had seen. The smell, the silence after the fight, the realization that most of the men they had killed had believed, utterly, that they could not lose. One Marine, recalling that night, said quietly, "They thought we would run. We didn't. And they never stopped coming." The Tenaru became a lesson carved into Marine Corps history, a turning point that proved the Pacific War would be fought not just with machines and ships, but with endurance. When dawn broke on August 21, 1942, and the smoke drifted over the river mouth, 800 Japanese soldiers lay dead. The Marines stood exhausted but unbroken, their hands shaking from adrenaline and fatigue. They had held their first line on foreign soil, and in doing so, had changed the trajectory of the Pacific War. Months later, when reporters visited the site, they found the rusted remains of helmets and rifles half buried in the sand. The jungle had already begun to reclaim the battlefield. Palm fronds bent over the old foxholes, and the river flowed quietly to the sea, as if nothing had happened. But beneath that calm surface lay the ghosts of the men who had believed courage alone could defy firepower. For the Marines, it was proof that war was no longer a contest of glory, it was a test of endurance, discipline, and adaptation. And for Japan, it was the first hint that their empire had met an enemy who would not break. The Battle of the Tenaru River lasted barely 8 hours. But its message echoed across every beachhead that followed, from Tarawa's reefs to Okinawa's cliffs. The myth of American weakness had died there, under the flares and tracers, when a handful of Marines stood against overwhelming assault and did not move. By sunrise, the tide carried the last bodies out to sea. The smell of smoke and salt lingered in the air. And in the stillness after battle, the Pacific War had changed forever.